Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
James sent me a note about this story. Said, Steve, this is kind of at the intersection of things you like to talk about and some of your own personal interests. And he's right. Radio towers causing problems for residents of Northern Kentucky neighborhood. This is from SpectrumNews1.com. Sam Neff wrote this. Residents of a Northern Kentucky neighborhood said radio signals from nearby towers are causing all kinds of issues. On top of that, they've got problems with cell phone service, which causes some of them to worry about the safety of their living situation. The question, of course, is, do those radio towers affect the cell phone service, or is that a different question? And it might be. So one resident said it's hard to justify $1 million home when you can't utilize everything on a day-to-day basis. Another resident said it just doesn't make it very enjoyable to live back here when you have such a nice neighborhood and such a nice city, and then said, well, but cell phone service has always been spotty here. Now, the mayor of the town said there are pockets of no cell coverage throughout the city because of a lack of cell towers. But the radio towers being so close to the village is what residents said are causing other issues. One person said you can't predict when it's going to happen, and it can affect your day-to-day life. The towers, which are owned by iHeartRadio, which is one of the biggest radio groups in America, and the radio signals are showing up in and around people's homes in unwanted ways. Now, the towers aren't moving around, but apparently their effects are changing and odd. A lot of the houses through this street right here had issues where our smoke detectors were going off constantly. Garage doors weren't working. Washers and dryers weren't working. Anything that had a small voltage wire wouldn't work. Some of them will actually pick up the radio signal through their computer headsets. One man said it has affected his car. If the vehicle is parked in the garage or right outside the garage, there's some type of interference that's basically causing it to try to open the trunk or to try to start the car. He said, basically every morning I have to jump start my vehicle. One person even shared a video her husband took of radio frequency coming in through natural gas lines connected to their stove. That's only funny because that's the last place you'd expect to be getting radio signals. Honey, check the news. Can you please fire up the stove? These issues might seem harmless, but there's a real concern about safety. If a fire happens and someone can't trust their alarms, or if an emergency happens and you need to call 911 and your internet's not working and your cell phone reception is not working because of these issues, it's obviously a danger to not only us but our neighbors as well, one of them said. How are you supposed to get a hold of anybody, or what happens in case of an emergency? So someone else said the city is aware of the issue, which residents said is intermittent and is looking into solutions, but it's possible there may not be one. Proximity is certainly going to be a hard thing to fight, she said. I don't know specifically, but we're certainly reaching out to everybody we possibly can to see if this can get fixed. Spectrum News 1 reached out to iHeart for comment to see if anything can be done. Has not yet received a response. City officials also wanted to clarify there are no safety concerns at the local elementary school, which has landlines in each classroom to compensate for the lack of cell service. Think of that, landlines. Remember those? In the old days, you didn't call someone on the phone. You called a building. Because there'd be a phone in a building, you'd call that phone. Somebody in the building would pick the phone up, whether it was a home or not. Didn't matter. But you didn't know who was going to answer the phone. It's whoever was near the phone. However, there are several issues here. One of which is these radio towers, I suspect, were there first. Okay? So you got a bunch of radio towers out here, and somebody goes, I'm going to build a development right here. They start building houses. At what point does somebody realize this is happening? Did every single house get built and every last person moved in, then somebody said, oh, wait a second, I'm having problems now? Because it makes me wonder if some of the first people to move in didn't immediately spot this, and somehow that word didn't get passed along to people who moved in last. That's the number one concern I've got. How did that happen? Number two concern I've got, and I worked in radio, so I know what radio towers look like. I've used them before. That's why I've got all those microphones behind me, for those of you who don't know. And I worked in radio, and I worked at a radio station on two different occasions where the tower was on the premises of the station, meaning that there's a building that the studio is in, and then the radio tower is right out back. Yeah, I mean, when you walked your car, it was towering over you, literally and figuratively. Likewise, another radio station I worked at, little building here, tower is right here. I mean, but literally right there, okay? And I understand that a radio station is not going to notice or not going to care about interference from their own radio tower if, in fact, it was causing any problems like this. But the point simply is that those towers are pretty obvious things. They're very, very tall. They've got blinking lights on them so airplanes don't hit them. And they're also probably broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, here's the thing. Some of you might not know this. There are things called daytime radio stations. I once worked at one that would sign off at sundown. So when I worked evenings, in the summertime, I was on the air till 10 o'clock at night. In the wintertime, we signed off at 5:45, I think. I forgot the exact time. However, the station shut down, the transmitters went dark, and the signal went silent overnight. Next morning, it fired right back up again. But I'm not sure if there's any of those stations still out there, and I highly doubt that this is an array of daytime-only stations. So my point simply is that somebody who's house shopping or looking at a place to build a house would go, hey, there's that gigantic radio tower. Now, it might not occur to somebody that having that huge tower right there is going to affect their lives, but it wouldn't be a surprise to you the tower's there. So I've seen stories recently about people who built a home near a farm and then complained about the smells from the farm. Well, the farm was there first. I did the story a while back about the racetrack. The racetrack's been there for decades. People build homes and go, oh my gosh, that racetrack is too loud. Can you guys keep it down, please? So when you come to the nuisance, and I'm using that term in the legal sense here, and complain about it after the fact, it's like, well, why did you choose there? Well, it's a nice looking house with a gigantic radio tower out back. You didn't see that? So the real question, though, is they appear to be mixing in the problem with cell phone coverage and the problem with getting reception on their gas pipes, which I admit would be weird. And it would also bother me if my small electronics didn't work properly or if my garage door opened and closed itself randomly. Yeah, of course, that would drive me crazy. But I'd also be looking at it going, I wonder why nobody told me this when I was buying the house. Because somebody had to know. Somebody had to know. So it's a crazy story. It's out of Kentucky. But yeah, it's at that intersection of things I talk about and things I think about, which is radio stations and homes and upset consumers. And I really do wonder who knew what and when, and why wasn't it passed along? So there you go. Sam Neff wrote that for SpectrumNews1.com. Radio towers causing problems for residents of northern Kentucky neighborhood, and that town is called Villa Hills, Kentucky. Could be Via Hills, but I think it's Villa Hills, Kentucky. When I grew up, there's a street near us called Villa, which is what we called it, Villa. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination.